Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on Boxing. Today we're talking about what's next. What's next for Anthony Joshua after his devastating loss to Daniel Dubois? Who called it? Me. One of the few channels on the YTBC that actually predicted that was very likely to happen. We're also going to be talking about the middleweight division and what's next there. Obviously, Janibek just had a very good performance last night, which I predicted perfect. Ninth round TKO. So that's great. That's definitely going to help my prediction league. So stay tuned to that. Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about these topics. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks to all those people who have been super chatting me and doing other things. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's always nice when you see people appreciate the effort you're putting in, and I appreciate you for appreciating me. So let's get to this. If I look a little tired, it's because last night I ended up in the emergency room. I have stones in my gallbladder, so I couldn't sleep last night and was in quite a bit of discomfort. To get me to actually drive to the hospital at 2:30 in the morning, obviously it took a little something, but I escaped with my gallbladder. I still have it, so that's good news. I thought the last time I went to the emergency room, I had to get my appendix taken out, so I was going to end up in the hospital, nobody knowing I'm there, right, in Taiwan, getting surgery to remove my gallbladder. That would have been excellent. But fortunately, that didn't happen. So I'm here today, and I'm back, obviously, with a little bit of medicine from Taiwan's medical system. Actually, it's not so bad, right? Emergency, it cost me 700 NT to get a CT scan, obviously, all the other testing and stuff as well, and my medication. For Americans that don't know, that's less than $30. It's good to live in Taiwan, especially when you're getting older and these kind of problems may become more significant. But let's get to it. So everybody that's watches my channel knows that I'm a big Anthony Joshua fan. Obviously, I went into this fight hoping AJ would win so that we potentially could see him in a super fight with Tyson Fury. But the way things unfolded, it is what it is. In boxing, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Obviously, it's never nice to see somebody you support get beat. But I was looking at, okay, so the Fury fight's probably off the table unless Fury gets dominated and beaten by Usyk in a rematch, which I don't think is going to happen. I'm predicting Usyk to win in the rematch, but you never know how things unfold. Then that fight once again would be relevant. But I was thinking a fight that made more sense was Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder fight. It's a fight we've been wanting for a long time. They're both not in the best form right now, so it's kind of the perfect time to make that super fight, even though it wouldn't quite be so super anymore. But still, it'd be a fight that Americans and Brits would both be down for. It'd bring back that whole us against them sort of red coat, blue coat mentality. But it looks like AJ and his team, for whatever reason, have chosen to go into a different direction and apparently are chasing after that Daniel Dubois rematch. I don't see this as being good business because the best thing that could happen is you could win. But at this point, I think that's very, very, very unlikely that AJ is going to get in with a super confident Daniel Dubois, who's going to go in and understand that if he just rushes AJ early, he's going to shake him up, put him on his back foot. And with AJ's punch resistance, the way it looks, it's only going to be a matter of time before the fight is over. So I look for an earlier stoppage if the rematch does happen. The worst thing that could happen is obviously it sends him into retirement, right? Before you get potential Fury fight or Wilder fights. And I understand those fights aren't what they once were, but nonetheless, they're still significant. They're big money fights. People want to see them. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you're past your best. It's still that fighter versus fighter. They're both past their best. All three of them are past their best. So it's not the peak of their careers, but it's still them being at a similar level, right? So, I'd be more excited to see them go in this direction. And I'm surprised Turki Al Sheikh didn't talk about potentially bringing Wilder and AJ to Saudi Arabia to do that fight, as opposed to doing this fight, which it's not going to be as big as the one they just did in Wembley. It can't be, because nobody is going to get as excited based on the dominance that Daniel Dubois put on in this fight. And if you're a real boxing fan, you would like to see Daniel Dubois step up and take on some of these dangerous opponents who've also had fantastic years. Guys like Jang, guys like Bakoli, guys like Parker, right? Guys like the German Turkish kid. Why I never can remember his name. But those four fighters have had breakout years in 2024, and they're like skyrocketing up, just like Daniel Dubois. I saw some people talking about him being fighter of the year. And while he's had a fine year and definitely is in the conversation for fight of the year, if Usyk beats Fury in a rematch, it's a done deal. You're not going to be able to not give Usyk fighter of the year by beating Fury two times. One time for undisputed, the other one obviously to defend what should be undisputed. So even though Daniel Dubois had a fantastic year, we got to keep things in perspective. I would be super excited to see him against any of those fighters, specifically Parker, who I pushed for that fight to happen, and obviously the Turkish kid, who fights out of Germany, obviously has looked great in past few fights, and I think stylistically really brings something different. What he's going to bring is kind of what people expected AJ to bring. But at this point, you can see his punch resistance is much better. He's far more confident, and I think better able to implement that game plan. This is the same guy who gave Derek Chisora a loss quite a few years ago, and then basically was blackballed by heavyweight boxing because people knew that the risk was too much for the lack of a reward you potentially could get from fighting him. Bakoli's coming off of a big win. Obviously, him and Jang would be a huge fight. I would love that fight. So then do Parker and Dubois. But let me know in the comment section below, what fights would you like to see amongst this crew of people? Obviously, Usyk and Fury have a fight scheduled coming up. So, we have to see how that unfolds before we put those guys into the mix. But as an AJ fan, like a career fan of Anthony Joshua, I would prefer if he went in a different direction. I don't really see this being a smart business decision. I see it pretty much being an end of an era in a sense. But let me know what you think. Then we get, of course, to the middleweight division. And the problem with the middleweight division, it's been stagnant for so long, right? Like, you can go back to when Golovkin became a bit of a name in America. Obviously, he'd been fighting in Europe and Central America prior to that. Wasn't really recognized by any casual fans. Hardcore fans knew this killer was, wiping out all of this mid-tier competition outside of the U.S. And they saw his name all over the rankings and knew that he was calling out guys like Sturm and Abraham and Sylvester and all these other Australian, European middleweight world champions, and that they were running from that smoke. He eventually was able to come to the States and really made a huge impact and got a lot of attention behind him. But again, high risk, low reward. So most of the big name American fighters like Cotto, Martinez, Peter Quillin, Billy Joe Saunders, Canelo Alvarez blatantly ducked him. They did not want to deal with this dangerous fighter. And at that time, it was kind of similar to 154. You had Charlo, Andrade, and Lara. None of them ever fought each other, right? Which is very disappointing. To have four world champions at one weight division, all very skilled fighters, yet none of them were willing to get in the ring with the other ones. So you didn't find out which of those four was the best. Most reasonable people think it's Erislandy Lara, who obviously is still a world champion today, unlike the other three. even though he is years and years older than they are. And then, of course, we did get some big fights. Obviously, we had the Canelo Alvarez Golovkin fight, and we would have loved to get the Golovkin versus Billy Joe Saunders for Undisputed. But, money sort of influenced Golovkin to chase after that rematch with Canelo instead, thus leading to the IBF forcing the strippage of the IBF title and then making that whole middleweight division a little more awkward. Andrade ended up getting that title. We weren't able to get a Golovkin Andrade or a Canelo Andrade fight. A lot of the haters love to put that on them, but it had everything to do with the IBF, nothing to do with the fighters, specifically Canelo Alvarez, who, because he wasn't able to get the undisputed fight and was being forced to defend his IBF title against a mandatory, chose to move up in weight. And since then, we've had Golovkin, who was a unified champion, but, wasn't really getting Charlo for whatever reason in the ring, which obviously would have still been the most significant fight at that weight class. Andrade was there as well. And at that time, Andrade Charlo, that would have been a natural fight. The winner of that then gets a Golovkin fight for Undisputed. But unfortunately, that wasn't able to be done either, right? So many big possible fights have fallen off over the last decade, right, in the middleweight division. And now it leaves us in this awkward situation where you have a 41-year-old champion holding one title, right? Carlos Adames, who is a guy that was a solid 154-pound fighter, moved up to 160, has looked good, but was blatantly ducked by Charlo, who was the WBC champion for a number of years now. Only because Charlo was put on championship in recess did Adames end up getting that title. And now the natural fight would be Adames versus Lara, in-house PBC fight. You also have Charlo in the mix as well, who you could have fight the winner for unified titles, right? And as far as in-house PBC fights, that makes fucking sense. But unfortunately, just because it makes sense doesn't make it make dollars and doesn't mean it's going to get made. What the rumors are now is Charlo is going to move to 168, which for him and the PBC probably makes more sense. You have a potential Caleb Plant Charlo grudge match, which boxing fans have been pretty eager to see. So that's a fight that definitely would generate quite a bit of capital, far more than a Lara or Adames fight. Janibek, well, he's a unified champion, isn't recognized in the U.S., doesn't have a big name fan base behind him. The best thing potentially that could help him is being connected to Turki Al-Sheikh and the Saudi Arabians, who obviously are making a lot of fights, throwing a lot of money in the sport. But if that's the case, then there's only one specific fighter that's really going to be in that conversation. And that, of course, would be Hamza Shiraz, who's already fought on several of those Saudi Arabian cards already and has really came out of nowhere and sort of, taken over the middleweight division in a sense. Even though he doesn't have a title, he's really seen by most people as the most entertaining and biggest threat at this weight class. Obviously, a Janibek Adames fight would be great, but that fight just doesn't seem like can be made for whether it's political or whatever the situation is, right? There's lots of back and forth between the two of them. But, what we need is obviously that Saudi Arabia money to force or generate enough interest from these two fighters and their camps to put them in a direction to one another. We have Lara, who hasn't really been an interesting or entertaining fighter his whole career, which is one of the reasons why people have went out of their way to avoid fighting him. Right? Even when losing against a Canelo, he still made Canelo look bad. And in winning against Trout for, that fight, he embarrassed Trout and showed that, there's levels between them. So you can understand why Charlo and Andrade blatantly ducked that guy for years. And then, of course, now he's at this weight division, but he's still not a big draw. We just had him against Danny Garcia. Nobody was interested in that fight. He went on to beat a Danny Garcia that should never have been fighting for a middleweight title. It was just a farce, more of that PBC recycling old name fighter type of things. At this point, who knows what Lara could do? You hope the PBC would make the Adames fight because it is an in-house fight. But yet you still got to cross your fingers and hope that they do. When you look at the other top up and coming names in this division, it's nothing to get excited about. The majority of you guys wouldn't know who any of these fighters are, right? The majority of them are European fighters. So, in a sense, if Hamza Shiraz becomes a champion, it makes more sense for him to then fight these fighters because that would generate attention in the UK, throughout Europe, obviously in Central America, Saudi Arabia. As far as the Americans, people who fight out of the States, fighting any of these names would be irrelevant, right? The rumor is that Adames is going to be forced to fight his Kazakhstani mandatory. That's right here, Nuran Salaf. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Kazakhstani fighter win that fight, right? Great amateur pedigree, obviously a very good fighter. He's not the biggest puncher, but he's a very skilled fighter. He's going to bring something to the ring that Carlos Adames probably has never seen before. Mosley, for the Americans, has some name recognition, right? Thanks to his father. He's been a game fighter and been doing very well recently as well. But yet, in saying that, he's still an afterthought within the American market. You have, of course, the Irish fighter, uh, Agarco, right, who's got quite a bit of push, was part of the Irish Olympic team, and has looked pretty good as a pro. And then, of course, the two other fighters, French and I think Italian, who look good. But outside of Europe, nobody knows who these fighters are, right? They need to get more attention. They need to get bigger fights. They need to fight each other, right? Anything to generate a little bit of buzz to get their names a little more recognized so that you could potentially put them into world title fights. These guys kind of fall into that similar position of William Skull, right? A Cuban fighter fighting out of Germany. Yet no one knows who he is. Nobody's watched him fight. He gets mandated by the IBF to get a Canelo fight, but there's no way that fight's going to happen because that fight wouldn't generate any interest at all. If you were to throw Canelo in with Skull, his mandatory, right, it would be hard to generate enough money to pay Canelo Alvarez $35 million because literally Skull brings nothing to the table. Cubans historically have been terrible draws in boxing as professionals. Obviously, difficult stylistic fighters because they don't engage. So it's a fight that stylistically wouldn't really be entertaining, but also doesn't have any name recognition. If Canelo was to go to Europe and fight Skull, even there, William Skull is not a big name, even in Germany. So, he'd be better fighting Jack Calquet than he would fighting William Skull. At least Jack Calquet is a recognized name in Europe, right? A guy who's been in world title fights. But, this is sometimes the problem with boxing. The way these sanctioning bodies work, it doesn't necessarily help build things up. Something that could potentially help the middleweight division is the 154-pound weight class, right? And I've been saying this for a long time. Guys like, what's his face? Who's the big guy from Maryland that was the unified champion? Well, I can't remember his name. PBC fighter, right? Guys like him, their progression to the middleweight division would add a lot of depth, some name recognition. You look at this current crop right now, obviously there's talk about Errol Spence going to the middleweight division. If Errol Spence went to the middleweight division, that would add a great name to the weight class. We don't know how Errol Spence would do as a middleweight because he's never even fought at 154. You think of some of these other guys that potentially may be growing out of this division, guys like obviously Virgil Ortiz, Madrimov, Funduro, Tim Tszyu, Boholchuk, potentially Xander Zayas down the road, Jesus Ramos, right? These guys are all big boys that inevitably are going to end up in the middleweight division. The question is, when are they going to move there, and how much name recognition are they going to bring with them? Are they going to be moving up there to try to do something great and become two-weight world champions, or are they going to move up there because they just weren't good enough to actually do anything at 154 and are moving up in weight, trying to look for a second opportunity? So that's going to be obviously something that impacts this middleweight division as well. Here's the current rankings by the sanctioning bodies. Let's just make this a little bigger so people can see completely, or more so I can see. So we can see right here for the WBC right now, Carlos Adames is the world champion. Hamza Shiraz is his mandatory. And from rumors that I've heard, they are in conversation to do that fight. But I can understand why the PBC wouldn't be interested in that fight, because it's probably a fight that their fighter is not going to win, which is probably why Nurislanov is being talked about as a potential mandatory by the WBC. You also have Chris Eubanks Jr., who's in this conversation, and he's in this conversation, just like Liam Smith, Amel Williams, right? Junior Hernandez, right? These guys are also right there, as well as guys like Troy Isley, Tyrone Davis. But the question is, they need big wins to at least elevate them into the conversation. At this point, you know, Hamza Shiraz and Adames are by and far the best two ranked fighters in this division. That would be a great fight. For the WBA, you obviously have Erislandy Lara, who's mandated to fight Shane Mosley Jr. That's kind of the kind of fight you would expect them to do. This is literally what the WBA does. You wouldn't see Shane Mosley ranked anywhere close to the top of any of these sanctioned bodies. The highest he is WBO is number 3. But of course, with the WBA, he's going to be number 1, because that's the kind of opponent they think they can sell for Lara. Mosley's got that Mosley name. Lara obviously is Lara. He's looking for opponents that are beatable, right? So look forward to Lara fighting Mosley for a defense of his WBA title in a fight that's going to probably be on a Tank Davis pay-per-view, right? And trying to use that name recognition to help sell that pay-per-view. You tell me if you'd be interested in buying it. It's not a bad fight, but I have no doubt that even a 41-year-old Lara beats Shane Mosley Jr., who in truth is probably not even a top 10 middleweight. Then, of course, you have unified champion Janibek. He just fought his number 3 mandatory in Andre Milikovic, who he stopped in 3 rounds. There's conversation that the WBO title wasn't online. And what does that mean? What some rumors are is that Hamza Shiraz is going to be fighting Denzel Bentley for that vacant WBO title. That, my friends, would be a plain robbery and is not really in character of the WBO. I'd be surprised if the WBO literally did that. It would seem strange to me. Obviously, Janibek fighting Mikalegovic made sense. This was a mandatory opponent, right? And the fight was scheduled to be made, but because of health issues that Janibek suffered, the fight was rescheduled, and now it's done. So now a potential Hamza Shiraz fight could literally be discussed. If Janibek is looking for the biggest payday of his career, outside of course, a Charlo fight, Hamza Shiraz is easily the biggest money fight available, right? Far more so than a Carlos Adames or as Erislandy Lara. You know, Hamza Shiraz, obviously, as I said, UK fighter, big UK fan base, obviously tied together with Saudi Arabia. So, you know, there's money in the bank for a potential fight between the two of them. And if Hamza Shiraz beat Janibek, him becoming a unified champion makes it far easier for him to then use that money behind him to push for undisputed between guys like Lara and Adames, specifically Lara, who, you know, is in there for a payday and would be more than happy to go to Saudi Arabia to get a career high payday to get beat by Hamza Shiraz. And Adames similarly. He's been around for a long time. He's had to wait for his opportunities, never really got any of the big money fights, was given a title, hasn't really generated much money out of that. And so a potential fight with Hamza Shiraz is one of those career paydays that a guy like him would jump at. This is obviously the biggest fight, I think, at the middleweight division. Janibek, Hamza Shiraz, 2 undefeated fighters. For Janibek, you know, the best possible opportunity he has for a money fight is Hamza Shiraz. It's funny that no matter how you sign this, the guy that's really bringing money to the middleweight division is Hamza Shiraz. And he's probably one of the least known fighters in the division to American boxing fans. I'm sure a lot of American boxing fans and YouTube channels out there really still don't even know who he is. But this is a fight I would love to see in early 2025. I think it makes a lot of sense. If I was Janibek, I would go out of my way to push for this fight. Apparently, he was already offered $5 million to take a Hamza Shiraz fight. $5 million. When you consider some of the offers we've seen recently going around in boxing, that's a more than fair offer. Like literally, some of the offers that Boots Ennis's opponents were offered were about $2 million. Obviously, they're not unified world champions at the level of a Janibek, but nonetheless, this is a great potential fight for him. Huge money. You beat Hamza Shiraz. Now you're a star. And you have Saudi Arabian money behind you and the opportunity to move up to 168 or stay at 160 and try to become unified, overpricing Adames and Lar to get them in the ring with you. That becomes much more of a reality. And we know he needs that outside money because we saw that he just was forced to go to Australia for $350,000 to fight his mandatory. So, he's not getting paid very well by Top Rank. So if Top Rank is going to get, subsidized by Saudi Arabia, that would be perfect for him. And if I was him, $5 million offer to fight Hamza Shiraz, I'd be all over that. That's easily $2.5 million in your bank. For a guy like him with $2.5 million, you could go out and buy 5 houses, right, easily, and rent those out and have an annual income coming in from those properties for the rest of your life. So even when you retire, you don't even need to worry anymore about working. You're covered, right? Those houses are going to bring in a passive income for you. So that's one, obviously, financial stream that he could easily get after a fight like that, as well as other investments and things you potentially could do with some of that money if you want to diversify it a little more. But let me know in the comment section below, out of this fight, who do you think wins? Do you think Janibek has the skill set and the toughness to endure Hamza Shiraz? Obviously, a guy who's, right, really confident, feeling himself right now, showing really, really good power. He's tall, he's super long, but he's looked vulnerable at times, right? And the question is, do you think Janibek can capitalize on those vulnerabilities? Obviously, he's the more experienced fighter. He's the champion, the unified champion. And him going to Saudi Arabia, because obviously he's Muslim and whatnot, it'll be an easy transition. He will be embraced just like Hamza Shiraz. This will be a very big fight in Saudi Arabia that, really gets a lot of support behind it. So I think even win, lose, or draw in this situation is definitely going to propel your career forward. For Hamza Shiraz, if he's able to beat Janibek, a star is born, right? The UK wants more big-name fighters. He would become that big-name fighter. Good-looking kid, good power, obviously becoming a unified champion with serious money behind you. He's got everything really in his corner. So, there's no way for him to lose except to lose. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this? Is that a fight that you are keen to watch? And if you are, who do you think would come through with the victory? I like both fighters, right? And I've been a supporter of Janibek. But to be fair, I would have to favor Hamza Shiraz to win that fight. And I think, in truth, for the middleweight division, it's better if he does, because he's far more of a guy that's going to bring a crowd, bring a fan base, bring money and attention to the middleweight division. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you later this weekend. Peace out. Enjoy your week. Don't end up in emergency.